Welcome to Haunting Echoes. I hope you're all doing well, but tonight, let me take you to a place where love turned deadly and death refused to sever the bond. We uncover the chilling story of Margaret and Henry, the couple who never left. Buckle up. This is one you won't soon forget. Deep in the heart of a dense, forgotten forest lies an isolated cabin, weathered, broken, yet eerily captivating. To an unknowing traveler, it might appear abandoned, a relic of simpler times. But those who dare step inside know better. This is no ordinary cabin. This is a place forever bound to the lives and deaths of Margaret and Henry. The story begins decades ago. Margaret and Henry were, by all accounts, a passionate couple. But as with many intense flames, their passion burned too hot. What started as love quickly turned into obsession, and their relationship became a storm of jealousy, control, and unrelenting arguments. Locals would often hear shouting echoing from the cabin late into the night, even when the windows were closed. Their disputes were legendary, an open secret in the small town nearby. And then, one fateful winter's evening, silence fell. Margaret and Henry were found dead. Margaret lay in the upstairs bedroom, a look of terror frozen on her face. Henry's body was discovered in the living room, his hands bloodied and cold. The official report called it a murder-suicide. Henry, consumed by rage, had allegedly killed Margaret before taking his own life. But the villagers? They weren't so convinced. Shortly after the tragedy, strange things began to happen. New owners would move in, lured by the cabin's charm and affordability, only to flee within weeks. Some reported hearing muffled voices in the dead of night, angry, spiteful tones bouncing through the walls. Others claimed to see shadowy figures arguing in the corners of the room. One particularly chilling story comes from a family who stayed there in the early 2000s. The couple's teenage daughter woke up one night to the sound of hushed whispers outside her door. She swore it was her parents talking, but when she opened the door, she saw no one, just the cold, empty hallway. Moments later, the whispers started again, this time from the living room below. The family left the cabin the next morning and never returned. Then there's the story of the paranormal investigator who stayed at the cabin to document the phenomenon. He reported hearing a loud argument one night. Words like, "You betrayed me," and "You'll never leave me," echoed through the house. When he checked the audio playback later, no voices were recorded, just silence and a faint, rhythmic thudding, like footsteps pacing back and forth. But perhaps the most unnerving detail lies in the reports of reenactments. Witnesses have claimed to see shadowy silhouettes of a man and a woman, replaying their violent argument over and over again. It's as if the walls of the cabin absorb their final moments and are doomed to project them like a cursed film reel. Paranormal experts believe that Margaret and Henry's intense emotions, the jealousy, the anger, the pain, imprinted themselves on the cabin. This residual energy, they say, fuels the haunting, keeping their spirits tethered to the place they called home. But skeptics argue it's all coincidence, a combination of eerie acoustics, an overactive imagination, and the power of suggestion. Yet, there are some who believe there's something even darker at play. Could the cabin itself be feeding on the chaos, amplifying the torment, and trapping the couple in an endless cycle of rage? If that's true, then Margaret and Henry aren't just victims. They're prisoners of a force far beyond human comprehension. As the years go by, the legend of the cabin and its ghostly residents only grows. Some adventurers visit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous shadowy figures. Others dare not step foot near it, fearing that what happened to Margaret and Henry might one day happen to them. So, what do you think? Was the tragedy of Margaret and Henry merely the result of human flaws? A love story gone horribly wrong? Or is there something darker binding them to that cabin, forever locked in their final moments? One thing is certain. If you ever find yourself near a lonely cabin deep in the woods, and you hear whispers in the night, be careful. You might just meet the couple who never left. We'll explore a chilling relic from a tragic love story, an antique mirror that doesn't just reflect your image, but your deepest fears and regrets. So settle in, because this story may have you second-guessing the next time you glance at your own reflection. In the heart of the haunted cabin lies an object that has baffled and terrified visitors for generations. An antique mirror, ornate and imposing, mounted on the living room wall. Its gilded edges are tarnished, its glass slightly warped, but its most unsettling quality isn't its age, it's what it shows. The mirror is rumored to hold the essence of Margaret and Henry, the ill-fated couple whose tragic deaths mark the cabin's dark history. But this isn't just a mirror. It's a window into something far more sinister. The first known story about the mirror's strange powers comes from the cabin's next occupants, a young couple named Sarah and Michael. They were honeymooners, lured by the cabin's quaint charm and the allure of a secluded retreat. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect until they noticed the mirror. At first, it was subtle. Sarah mentioned feeling uneasy whenever she walked past it, as if she were being watched. Michael laughed it off, calling it new place jitters. But then, one evening, as they sat on the couch, their eyes fell on the mirror. What they saw would haunt them forever. Their reflections were there, but something was off. Their faces looked wrong. Sarah's eyes in the reflection were filled with tears, and Michael's mouth twisted into a snarl of anger. They turned to look at each other in real life. Both calm, both silent, but the mirror told a different story. The couple began to argue, first about what they had seen, then about old wounds and insecurities they had buried long ago. It was as if the mirror had unearthed their deepest fears and magnified them. Their honeymoon turned into a nightmare, and by the end of their stay, they left the cabin without ever looking back. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the years, countless couples have reported similar experiences. Some claim to see Margaret and Henry themselves, their ghostly faces twisted in rage, staring back from the glass. Others describe hearing faint whispers as they gaze into the mirror, taunting, mocking, impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most chilling tale comes from a man named Ethan, who visited the cabin with his fiancée, Lisa. Ethan, a self-proclaimed skeptic, decided to test the mirror late one night. Lisa was already asleep upstairs, so he stood in front of the mirror, determined to prove it was just an old piece of glass. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just his own tired reflection. But then, as he leaned closer, the image began to change. His reflection didn't mimic his movements. Instead, it smiled, a cold, knowing smile that didn't match the expression on Ethan's face. The reflection began to whisper, its voice low and menacing. "She doesn't trust you," it said. "She knows what you did." Ethan stumbled back, his heart racing. He turned to leave the room, but before he could, the reflection added, "You'll never escape us." The next morning, Ethan tried to convince Lisa to leave the cabin immediately. When she asked why, he couldn't bring himself to tell her. The couple left that day, their engagement falling apart just weeks later. So what is the truth behind the mirror? Some believe it's a portal, a connection to Margaret and Henry's tortured spirits, who use it to manipulate and torment anyone who steps into their domain. Others think it's a cursed object, imbued with the energy of the couple's violent end, reflecting the chaos that once consumed them. Paranormal researchers have examined the mirror, documenting electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained temperature fluctuations around it. But no one has been able to explain the psychological effect it has on those who stare into it. One theory suggests the mirror feeds on emotion, amplifying the darkest aspects of a person's psyche. It doesn't just show you who you are, it shows you who you fear you might become. And for couples, it reveals the fractures in their relationship, forcing them to confront the insecurities they'd rather ignore. So, is the mirror truly haunted? Or is it simply a psychological phenomenon, a trick of the mind? The truth remains as warped and elusive as the mirror's surface itself. But one thing is certain: those who've stood before the mirror of regret are never the same. The reflection they see doesn't fade. It lingers, haunting their thoughts long after they've left the cabin. What if your worst fears and the cracks in your closest relationship were amplified to the breaking point again and again? This is the story of the cycle of the cabin. Hold your breath, because this tale might have you questioning your next romantic getaway. There's something strange about the cabin deep in the woods. Not just the tragic deaths of Margaret and Henry, nor the stories of shadows and whispers that have haunted it ever since. What makes the cabin truly terrifying is the pattern, an unrelenting cycle that seems impossible to break. It starts the same way every time. A couple arrives, drawn by the allure of isolation and escape. The first night passes uneventfully, though many report a sense of unease, a faint whisper in the distance, or the feeling of being watched. By the second night, the unease grows. Objects begin moving on their own. Doors creak open without explanation. Whispers turn into voices, urging one or both partners to leave. And then comes the third night. The cabin's true power is revealed. Every couple who stays here experiences a breaking point, as if the cabin itself is forcing them to relive the violent, tragic final days of Margaret and Henry. Take the story of Tom and Emily, for example. They booked the cabin for a long weekend, hoping for a peaceful escape from their hectic lives. The first night, Emily mentioned hearing faint whispers while brushing her teeth. Tom dismissed it as the wind, but by the second night, both of them heard it, soft voices calling their names. That night, Emily woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps pacing outside their bedroom door. When they investigated, they found the kitchen in disarray. Chairs had been overturned, cupboards left wide open, and a single knife was embedded in the wooden dining table. Tom accused Emily of playing a prank, but Emily was too terrified to respond. By the third night, the cabin had taken its toll. The couple's frustration with each other exploded into a heated argument. Tom accused Emily of being too controlling. Emily accused Tom of never listening. The tension escalated until Tom, in a blind rage, stormed out into the cold night. Hours passed before he returned, his hands trembling and his face pale. When Emily asked what had happened, he simply said, "I saw them." The next morning, the couple left the cabin without a word. Their relationship ended weeks later. But Tom and Emily's story is far from unique. Over the decades, countless couples have reported eerily similar experiences. And while some make it out with their relationships intact, many do not. The whispers, the shadows, the overwhelming anger, it's all part of a sinister pattern that no one seems able to escape. Local folklore suggests that Margaret and Henry's tragic end imprinted itself onto the cabin, creating a kind of emotional echo that traps anyone who steps inside. The cabin feeds on tension, magnifying the smallest cracks in a relationship until they shatter. But there's another theory, one that's even more unsettling. Some believe the cabin itself is alive, a malevolent entity that feeds on human emotions, particularly anger and despair. It doesn't just want to destroy relationships. It needs to, sustaining itself on the chaos it creates. So, is there a way to break the cycle? Paranormal investigators suggest that couples who remain calm and united, who refuse to give in to fear or anger, might be able to escape the cabin's grasp. But few have tried, and even fewer have succeeded. One chilling account comes from a couple who claimed to have broken the cycle. They reported hearing the same whispers, seeing the same shadows, and feeling the same oppressive tension. But instead of fighting, they held hands, whispering reassurances to each other. On the third night, when the whispers turned into screams and the shadows surrounded them, they stayed calm, refusing to react. The next morning, the cabin was silent. They left and never looked back, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was still watching, waiting for its next victims. So, what do you think? Is the cabin a cursed remnant of Margaret and Henry's tragedy, or is it something darker, feeding on the relationships it destroys? And if you found yourself in the cabin, could you resist its pull, or would you fall victim to the cycle? Thank you for joining me tonight as we unraveled the sinister mystery of the cycle of the cabin. If you enjoyed this story, or felt the chill of its curse, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Echoes. And for more tales that will keep you awake at night, check out the videos on your screen. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, some places are better left unexplored. This is Haunting Echoes signing off.